Okay, so now talking about water and the situation in California, because many people are wondering where the water is. They're wondering why exactly the fire hydrants did not have the pressure that they need to battle this blaze. And water's been a pretty much a very, very long baited issue in the state of California, particularly in Southern California, in litigating a way to get the water from northern part to the southern part. So this article here, this is from KRCR, saying state scales back plans to move water from Northern California to Southern California. This is back in 2022. This article was written, and the reason I'm presenting this now in the light of these wildfires is to show people how these precautions should have been made out, how they could have not maybe not prevent it, but they could have de-escalated the situation and prevented it from further exposing to what it is right now. That in a dry state like California, in a part in the southern part in Los Angeles, where they're desperate for water, there's been droughts for months. This is something that is a necessity if you're going to maintain a residency in that area. So the article goes on to say a new plan to reroute how water moves from wetter Northern California to drier Southern California would ferry some of its through a single 45-mile or 72-kilometer underground tunnel wrapping around the state's existing water delivery system and dumping into the main aqueduct that flows south to vast swaths of farmland and millions of people. The proposal released Wednesday would build one tunnel to take water from the Sacramento River, the state's largest, to the California Aqueduct for delivery further south. It scaled back from the two-tunnel plan championed by former Governor Jerry Brown and the latest iteration of a project that has been talked about and planned in some form, but never constructed for about half a century. So this is something that they knew even back then, that this was a necessity for Southern California. If you're going to maintain people living in this highly populated area where you know that there's going to be active weather, you know that there's going to be droughts, you know that wildfires come up preemptively, you're going to need to take these necessary precautions. They had it planned out, but they never got to action for almost half a century. This has never been constructed. When Governor Gavin Newsom took office in 2019, he ordered water officials to scrap the existing plans and start over. With one tunnel, the new proposal moves less water and aims to reduce harms to the environment. But most critics say the new route will still harm endangered species like salmon and people who rely on the water in the north. The two sides have become so entrenched that the project's fate will ultimately depend on whether Newsom or a future governor can muster the political will to push it through, said Jeffrey Brown, Senior Fellow with the Water Policy Center at the Public Policy Institute of California. This project is unlikely to be decided on its technical merits, he said. State water officials say the tunnel is badly needed to modernize the state's water infrastructure in the face of climate change. Scientists say it's likely to cause both prolonged droughts and major pollution of water and snow. It will also better shield the state's water supply from the risk of earthquake that causes leaves to crumble and ocean salt water to flood into the system. Though California is in their third year of a punishing drought, it saw record rainfall last October and another major dump of rain and snow in December, some of which the state was unable to capture. And that was what Donald Trump was mentioning, that we need to create a system in the northern part to capture the billions and billions of gallons of rainwater and then flow it down to the south. Which sounds like a decent proposal. Again, if you're talking about making sure that the safety and the conditions of Southern California are met, it seems like a necessity at this point. Our water infrastructure was not built for that, said Wade Crawford, Secretary of California's Natural Resources Agency. The Department of Water Resources Plan analyzed the effects of the project on the environment, residents, and fish and farmland. Critics say it will harm communities in the fragile Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta, which rely on the water that could be instead diverted into the tunnel. Officials did not release a price tag. A prior estimate for a single tunnel route put it at about $16 billion. It would be paid for by water agencies that contract with the state to use it. Still, even if the political support to build it is there, construction likely won't break ground until at least 2028 and would take more than a decade, says Carrie Buckman, Environmental Program Manager for the project. So, talk about the reliability of California, of the state government officials, of people like Gavin Newsom, who know that in a situation like this, again, I have to reiterate this, you're talking about Southern California that is dry, that they get frequent droughts on the regular. And here you are proposing initiatives to bring water from the northern part to the southern part to reallocate the water so that you can bring a bit of moisture to the southern part so that if a wildfire does break out, it won't be the catastrophic damage that it is now. Because on top of the winds, on top of how dry it is just a instant fire hazard in Southern California that this happens on the regular. Again, we don't know for sure how exactly these fires started, and we don't know for sure what the cause of it is. That's still being investigated. Anything at this point could happen. But the matter of it is that if you have the necessary tools to mitigate this, then you would have the ability to preemptively downtrack a natural disaster like this. It wouldn't be the fate that it's in right now. You wouldn't see the catastrophic damage. There wouldn't be over $50 billion worth of damages if they did bring water to the reservoirs in LA to preempt for this. And this is part of the mismanagement by people like Gavin Newsom, by the representatives of Los Angeles. This is how California really just screws with you. And how people like Gavin Newsom is like a car salesman. Not just by his looks, but his attitudes. I'm going to promise you great things. I'm going to promise you water. I'm telling you, you come in and you pay your dues and we'll find a reliable vehicle for you. But it's not going to happen. They take all this money, one of the richest states in the United States, the 5th largest economy in the world, and they can't even provide access to water. They can't even provide the ability to bring access to clean water. Access to water in the case of these wildfire damages. That is what's catastrophic about all this, on top of the damages that have already taken place. So, it goes on to say the preferred route, which would build 2 stations to pull water from the Sacramento River just south of the capital city, then carried the water south along Interstate 5 before breaking off toward Bethany Reservoir at the top of the California Aqueduct, the state's main channel for moving water south, built in the 1960s. 2 in 3 Californians, or about 27 million people, rely on water that comes from the Sacramento San River Delta, at a vital estuary where the 2 rivers mingle with tidal flows from the Pacific Ocean before it's conveyed south through the State Water Project. At the southern end of the Delta state, a federally run pumping plants suck up the water and send it south. The proposed tunnel project will take the water from Sacramento River before it reaches the Delta. The Delta region is home to millions of people, more than 625 square miles of farmland, and critical species like the endangered salmon and the Delta smelt. Advocates worry the tunnel will divert the fresh water before it reaches them. The state already lacks enough water to keep the Delta flourishing and is fulfill its existing water delivery contracts. State officials say the tunnel would only be used when there's a lot of water flowing through the river, like after a major rainstorm. Environmental restrictions already limit how much water the Delta pumps that can move at certain times of the year, regardless of supply, to avoid harming fish. So it seems like Southern California has to suffer because of this fish known as the smelt. Now, when getting this article, I just want to note this. When getting this article put together, I have seen people commenting underneath this story that came out, and some of them were actually from, fisheries and oceanic scientists, whatever you call it, oceanographers, I guess the proper name for them is, that mentioned about the smelts. And they stated that, yes, it is an endangered species, but there are other regions in the United States that have the smelt in place, that have this fish already plentiful in place. So for California to do this just kind of seems, I don't even know really the word to it, but the fact that you're going to cut off the entire region of Southern California and try to restrict them access to moisture that they desperately need, especially knowing in a situation like this, for a smelt, just seems kind of crazy. It seems kind of crazy, folks. Water officials say the chosen path would have the least negative consequences of the various options. Still, the 10-year construction would require moving 71 buildings, including 15 homes, as well as overtaking 2,300 acres of farmland and running through cultural resources and sites significant to tribal communities, the report said. As for the fish, the project could hurt both the Delta smelt and the endangered winter-run Chinook salmon. The report says fewer juvenile salmon would survive and less food would be available for the Delta smelt, which state officials say would be mitigated by habitat restoration. The project could harm water quality by increasing the amount of bromide and chloride and increasing the salt content. Doug Obji, senior attorney in the water program, the Natural Resources Defense Council, called the report deeply disappointing and said it fails to consider alternatives that would truly protect salmon and other wildlife. So, just to show people, this is what the Delta smelt looks like. It's a very, very tiny fish. Almost, literally, you can, maybe in the size of a pinky. That, it's the endangered species. That's one of the species that they mentioned about keeping the fish in this area. That's why they're not releasing this water. And this is not new information. This is not something new. This article was written 2 years ago, but they've been talking about this for a long while now. This has been going on for many, many years. They know that Southern California frequently gets droughts, that they constantly get lashed out for their conservation of water. And considering that a lot of the people in Southern California, a huge dense population, are being shunned out from a necessity because of this, just seems like it's just mismanagement. Like, why can't they find a way or find some sort of situation that they can move the fish to a safer environment and still give access to necessary water to a place that needs it? Again, if you're going to have a huge population in virtually a desert, you're going to need that. You're going to need that regardless. But here is Donald Trump. This is back when he was on Joe Rogan podcast, and he mentions about this issue. And he's been very vocal about how California desperately needs some sort of waterway system to bring the northern water from Sacramento and the mountains down to the desert of Southern California. And here's what he said to Joe Rogan about this issue.
They said, we have no water. I said, do you have a drought? No, we don't have a drought. I said, why don't you have no water? Because the water isn't allowed to flow down. It's got a natural flow from Canada all the way up north of water, more water than they could ever use. And in order to protect a tiny little fish, the water up north gets routed into the Pacific Ocean. Millions and millions of gallons of water gets poured. I could have water for all of that land. Water for your forests. You know, your forests are dry as a bone.
Yeah.
Okay?
Dangerous.
That water could be routed. You know, you could have everything. Oh, not only dangerous, billions of dollars a year they spend on forest fires. And, you know, there's a case with the environment. They're not allowed to rake their forests because you're not allowed to touch it. And all they have to do is clean their forest, meaning rake it up, get rid of the leaves, get rid of, leaves that are sitting there for 5 years. And
we'll certainly get rid of the dead fall.
And get rid of the trees that have fallen that are like.
So he mentions about how we need to redirect water into the parts that desperately need it in California, but also mentioned about the mismanagement of the forest industry. And, you know, now looking at the situation now and hearing this back then, it makes sense. It actually does make sense. People used to joke about it. They said, you know, all the late night comics would say, oh my God, giving this guy a rake and shoving him to the forest. What a crazy maniac this guy is. He has nothing to do with science. But it is basic biology. It's basic natural order that if you have a dry climate, and whether you agree with the climate aspects or not, you know, that's a different detail. That's irregardless, it's not even to the point of this. The matter is that you're dealing with a huge population that set up shop in a position, in a region that desperately needs moisture. They desperately need water. And in order to do so, they have to mitigate some of that water from other areas within the region. They have to go northern part. They have to go, he mentioned about from Canada going down south to a lot of these different areas. That is a necessity. And the fact that governor after many officials in California government, and considering majority of his Democrats, a Democratic state, it's a blue state, refused to do really any action for it, is now showcasing with these wildfires. Because if they had a system in place, they would have been better prepared for a situation like this. Instead, you let the forests get mismanaged. You have all this dead wood. You have all the essentials to basically cause a blaze to start. And then once that spark is lit, all hell broke loose. And that is what is happening with all this. And you have people like Gavin Newsom just complete disregard of what he could have done and the proper management authority to better proportion and better prepare the people of Los Angeles when there comes to be a situation like this. Here is Donald Trump even again mentioning this on the campaign trail.
And you have so much water, and all those fields that are right now barren, the farmers would have all the water they needed. And you could revert water up into the hills where you have all the dead forests, where the forests are so brittle. Because no place is like California. I go to Austria. The head of Austria tells me, we have trees that are much more flammable than what you have in California. We never have forest fires because they maintain their forests. And you have all that water that could be used as water, what they call water flow, where the where the land would be damp. And you'd stop many of these horrible fires that are costing billions and billions of dollars by the federal government, etc. So one thing I'm going to do for California, vote for me, California. I'm going to give you safety. I'm going to give you a great border. And I'm going to give you more water than almost anybody has. And the farmers up north are going to be able to use 100% of their land, not 1% of their land.
And if you look at the election results, particularly in California, you notice that a lot of it at this time around turned red. Maybe it had something to do with this. Maybe it's something to do with the farmers. Maybe it's something to do with the fact that you're dealing with a state, the fifth largest economy on planet Earth, not just in the States, but in the world, fifth largest economy. And you have so many crises on top of crises, and the just absolute disregard from people like Gavin Newsom by the mayors within California to turn this into the havoc hellscape that it currently is right now. And a lot of this could have been easily prevented. A lot of this could have been easily, there's no way to really stop wildfires from happening. And I think that's the problem, the whole climate change situation, whether you agree with it or not, that's its own topic. But the whole proponent is it's hard to legislate what nature will do. It's hard to legislate on nature on its behalf. So the best thing we can do is try to find ways to, if a situation does occur like this, that we have the resources, that we have the necessities, that we have the precautions and the availability to able to prevent a larger attack from happening or a larger scale situation like the current wildfires are doing right now. That is the situation that Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass completely just ignore from the regular people. And here's just another thing to add to this. So Just an American says Enton Canyon Reservoir, where the end fire, is empty and has trees growing in it. Not even the winter snow runoff is collected. So you have reservoirs that are completely empty with no water in sight in virtually one of the driest parts in the state. On top of high winds, on top of forests that need restoration. They need to be cleaned up. They need to be dealt with in a manner. And all it takes, we don't know for sure what happened, but all it takes is just for a little spark to happen, and you just have all the ingredients to the catastrophic damages, the apocalyptic nightmare that Californians are dealing with today. That is why we bring this to you. That is why we're holding people like Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass accountable for this, even though they're trying to manage how they're being perceived in the media. They're trying to stop the disinformation. But knowing that California was dealing with a drought for many months, and they had every opportunity to bring water, source water from different parts to establish some sort of precaution, some sort of moisture, something to the people of Los Angeles, and just refuse to do so, kind of is on them. It kind of is on them.